Hey, welcome back to Group Leader Training. We're in video number 2 this week, and man, I'm so excited to dive into this, right? We're talking about this idea of how to grow your group, right? We've all been a part of that group. Maybe you're a part of it right now as you're leading or as you're participating in a group. It's that one group that, man, it is just thriving, and man, it's so fun to walk into the room because it's filled up with people, and people are laughing and cutting up, and they're eating some food that someone brought, right? We've all been a part maybe of that group, or we desire to be a part of a group like that. And that's a great desire, right? To see a group flourish and thrive and see people being added to it. But how do we help develop groups that grow like that? To help connect other people to groups where people are visiting, people are committing to the group, people are growing in their walk with God. Well, we want to talk about that today in this video. So the question we want to ask is, how do we grow our groups, right? As leaders, as people who are participating in groups. So do you know what it is? Well, it's fellowship, right? You're like, is it really that easy? Is it really just as easy as fellowship? Well, it may be not what you were thinking about initially when you thought about growing a group, but fellowship is such an important piece of growing your group. In fact, we see it in the scriptures when Jesus is interacting with some religious leaders. And in Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39, Jesus says these very words. He said to them, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important command. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Right, and it's really in these verses that we see the concept of fellowship coming out, right? We see ultimately first that this idea of fellowship is our vertical relationship with God. That as we commune with the Father through prayer, right, as we pray and communicate with Him, and then we're listening to hear Him speak through His Word and through God's people and through our circumstances, that we're interacting with God, that we're fellowshipping with Him. It's this gift that we've been given because of the person and work of Jesus Christ. And that's such a wonderful gift that we get to enjoy in our lives, and it is one that sometimes we often misunderstand. That this idea of prayer, most often we make prayer into something that we ask God in order to receive, but prayer was really instituted as a way for us to communicate with the Father and to be with Him, in relationship with Him, and in fellowship with Him. Right, and so this idea of fellowship, you see it right here as Jesus is saying, is that first and foremost, right, this idea of fellowship is with the Father. It's this vertical relationship. But then he dives into the second part, right? Did you see it? Right, you look at verse 38, and he says, or really it's 39, he says to love your neighbor as yourself. Right, so then the second part of fellowship is not only this vertical relationship with the Father, but then it's this horizontal relationship with other believers. Right, that this fellowship that we're experiencing in groups, that it's being fostered in our groups, is this idea that we're vertical, right, with God, but then we're horizontal with one another, and that we're developing these meaningful relationships with one another. Right? We don't want superficial relationships. We don't want surface level relationships in our groups. We want ones that are meaningful, that are deep, that we know one another. We know each other's struggle. We know each other's lives. We know the challenges that we go through. But there's a warning here when we talk about this, because sometimes the temptation is to force our people to go deep right off the bat, to just dive into these relationships right off the bat. But nothing can kill a group faster when you force your people into deep, meaningful relationships. In fact, you can't microwave a relationship, right? It takes time. You got to let it grow. You got to let it develop. And it's this idea that a friend of mine said one time. He said, you got to forge relationships, right? It takes time. It takes development. Right? Sometimes when you start a group, it'll take you 6 months to a year to even begin to see meaningful relationships develop. Now, some groups may develop quickly, but the average group can take 6 months to a year to even begin to see some relationships developed in a meaningful way. And sometimes conflict is one of the ways that God uses that type of circumstance to draw people together and to develop this deep, meaningful connection. And we've all been wired for this, right? We've been wired to have a deep connection with one another, right? Horizontally with other believers, but also vertically with God the Father. In fact, remember from last week that God has wired this into the fabric of our DNA since the beginning of time. That for before creation, right, that when God existed before creation, that He existed in community. So community originates with our Creator, and He's instilled that in each of our lives. He's instilled that into every single one of the human beings on earth to desire community with the Father and to desire community with one another. And there are some of those in the world, right, that don't have that type of fellowship with God, right? They're far from Jesus. They're separated from the fellowship of God. But there is a longing in their heart for God. They just don't know it. And so part of our job is to be able to express this free gift that we've been given to the world through our fellowship with one another and our fellowship with God as a way to represent to the world this free gift that God's given us to this restored fellowship with Him through the person and work of Jesus. So let's return to the question we asked earlier. How do we grow our group? Well, we grow our group by one, making sure that we're having fellowship with God, right? In our vertical relationship as leaders, as group members, that we're having constant connection with the Father through prayer and through His Word. But then also connection with other believers horizontally, that we're doing life together, that we're serving together, that we're going out and reaching people for Jesus together, that we're doing this together in community. Why? Because when we do that, it's a representation to the world of Jesus and His work in our lives. We saw this in Acts 2 last week, that as the people of God were gathering and fellowshipping with the Father and fellowshipping one another, that God added to their number day by day. Now, of course, you could grow your group by inviting people and going out and engaging in your community. Those are all great ways to grow your group. And we're going to talk about those more specifically in a leader training session. But nothing is better than working on the fellowship that you have with God vertically and with other people horizontally. Because when we get those things right, then the natural byproduct is to invite other people into that fellowship, because we understand how great of a gift it is. And that we want to bring others into the fold to experience this gift of fellowship and community that the Father has wired in the fabric of our DNA and has given to us through the person and work of Jesus Christ. And we have such a great gift that we're able to as leaders, as people of God, to be able to offer these types of environments for people to experience the gift that God has given to us. And I just think, man, this is such a great privilege for us and an honor that we get to be a part of growing environments where people get to fellowship with God and with other people. And then that transformation, those lives of transformation in our group then go out into the community and they begin to share it with other people. And then more people are added to our groups and more people are coming to our groups because they see the fellowship we have with the Father and with one another, and they see it, and it's so contagious because there's nothing like it in all the world. It's supernatural, right? It's something that God has wired and designed for His people. So as we bring this video down to the end, man, I'm so excited for this week as we have our training session in person, and we're going to talk about this a little deeper. But man, our next video is going to be even better because we're going to talk about this idea of how do you grow your people, right? How do you grow your people in a strategic way by using a spiritual pathway to know and identify where your people are, and then identify their next step and help them continue to grow in their walk with Jesus to become a disciple maker, right, that reaches the world, that engages other people and makes disciples of Jesus until He returns. So until then, man, I hope you have a great day, and then I'll see you back in our next video.